Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. Today, we're talking about the leverage points. Josh, if you can follow me on Miro board, that would be good. Today, we find ourselves learning about leverage points. Josh and I will help you understand the leverage points and also do a little workshop towards the end. Today, we are in our week 5 of our 9-week long journey, and I hope you stay committed for the next 4 weeks as well. Today, we are using our 10th guide here out of the 20 that we have. At Systems Innovation Network, we have 20 guides, each divided into five of them divided into 4 sections: systems thinking, systems mapping, transition design, and ecosystem building. And I hope you are able to learn through the guides in between the 2 events. So for resources today, we are using the leverage points guide that we just saw. And also here is a course that you can use to learn a little more about the leverage points. And you can also ask us any questions that you have in between the events. This session, like every other session, is scheduled for 9 minutes. And this is what we will cover in this time. First, we will do a presentation, which will be about 35 to 40 minutes. And then we will do the workshop, trying to apply all that we have learned here. So get geared up. And then we hope, like always, we want this session to be as interactive as possible. And then this is actually being live streamed on YouTube. So I hope if you have any questions, you can always go back to this video later. I will share the link from today's event in the feed of the SI Learning series on the SI network. The main objective of this Systems Innovator Learner series is that we would like to help all of you understand systems innovation better, get you hands-on understanding and experience with the tools. And this is a 9-week long journey. And today we're already in week 5. And this time we're doing a bit different, exploring the new features on Miro board. So this is the icebreaker. It's also quite simple. This is the question for the icebreaker today, which is: on a scale of low to high, how comfortable do you feel in explaining the idea of leverage points to someone else? So this is quite simple. If you think you are somewhere high, you can just pull up a dot from here and just put on the scale wherever you find your profile fitting quite well. I will bring everybody to me so you can be on this part of the board. And I hope Josh has already shared the Miro board for the new joinees for the Zoom. I will pause for a minute. I think okay, so I see a lot of hovering around in the middle of the scale. I think we are doing really on the medium level, which is nice. So it really helps us get started, and you already have a bit insight into leverage points. Just down below, here's a section where you can add profiles of your LinkedIn or any channel that you would like to that you would like to share with the others today. If you find yourselves already, you can pull a star and put it right next to the name. We just want to show how repetitive people are and how committed everybody is in this learning series event. So yeah, that is all from my side. I hand it over to Josh to walk us through the leverage points canvas, the guide here, and help us understand what it is all about.
Thank you very much, Ezra. Great to see you all here today. Good to see you back again, Timmy, Harry, Ken. We're back to talk, really building upon last week where we did our systems mapping. And hopefully you got insight into that, how to represent a complex system through these different diagrams, maps and causal loop diagrams. And today should really build upon that in terms of we have that systems map. And now we want to think about intervening somewhere and trying to have high leverage in doing that, because complex systems are obviously often very, very large and very complex. And if we don't find these high leverage points, our best efforts and intentions are unlikely to go very far. So this is the idea here, leverage points. It was originally introduced by Donella Meadows a number of decades ago, maybe 80s or so. And it's the idea that a small shift in one thing can produce a big changes in everything, as she said. And it's definitely caught people's imagination and a lot of interest in it. It's often sometimes misunderstood because it's often interpreted sometimes in linear ways instead of, this non-linear kind of system stuff we're talking about. So we're going to unpack all of that. We'll be talking about the iceberg model. Maybe you've heard of that idea, but we'll just run through that for those who haven't, because that helps us think about the different levels on which to intervene in the system and the different levels of leverage that we have on those different levels, right? So social acupuncture, so that's then starting to look at a more networked approach to this. The iceberg model is going to help us think about abstraction, right? Are we operating on a kind of fundamental level or a more superficial level where there's less leverage? The social acupuncture then is going to start introducing us to this idea of the system as a network, as a map, and we need to think about those interlinkages and where we're intervening in that network and the effects that has. And yeah, starting to build a strategy for leverage points and intervention points, and eventually assessing that. So that's what we're going to cover in the ideas. And we're also going to have a couple of little workshops as we go along with the iceberg model, and then with one of these systems maps. And Azra's going to help you apply that. So hopefully that's what you came for. Let's start here with the iceberg model. And here it is. Peter Senge says small changes can produce big results, but the areas of highest leverage are often the least obvious. And that's when we take a linear kind of view of the world. It gives us a certain framing about the way systems work and about how influence and the capacity to change a system can work. But with systems thinking, we're thinking about a nonlinear approach that's going to help us look more at system structure and how to influence that. So that's what it means by it's often counterintuitive because our traditional thinking leads us back to thinking of the highest places of leverage in the system as being these, right? The people at the top who have the power, and they do in a particular way. They have this linear causality, right? The presidents, the CEOs, and so forth. They have access to a lot of resources, and they're able to use that to directly influence the events and the effects and the outcomes of a system. And that is a form of power, a form of influence. But it's not the kind we're talking about here because it doesn't really lead to systems change. It leads to partial change at best, or temporal change, but not sustainable change and not systemic change. So that's part of where our thinking goes wrong, right? If we think about big changes in a complex system, we quite quickly, traditionally, come back to policy or, the CEOs, the presidents, the people who have the power and the money and resources and so forth. And that is not actually leads us astray when we think about changing systems. So that's what Peter Senge was saying there about it being counterintuitive. It's not actually those people at the top that have the highest leverage. So here's Donella Meadows, who was the lady who introduced it. She wrote that paper, Places to Intervene in a Complex System. Leverage points are not intuitive, right? So she says it again. Or if they are, we intuitively use them backwards, systemically worsening whatever problems we're trying to solve. So there we have it. That's what Peter Senge and Donella Meadows have to say. And there's different ways of approaching this. The basic concept here of the iceberg model is this idea of going upstream, that it's an analogy, right? If we have a big river like this, and you want to change that river, the river is a system, and you want to change the course of the river. And that could be any system. If we talk about the course of the river, it's like the way this system is doing what it does, right? The way where our materials economy, the way that river is currently flowing and set up is to produce a lot of plastic waste and throw it out into the sea and so forth. So you're coming along and say, I want to change the system. I want to change the course of this river. And that looks pretty ambitious kind of endeavor. So we're going to have to find high leverage if we're going to achieve this. And if we go downstream, where we often are, paddling around on our boat here in the estuary, we have a big roaring river. And it's going to be very difficult to change a big roaring river. You're going to have to build a big dam and get a lot of concrete and get a lot of money and so forth. And then you might put a lot of force into changing that system. But if you went upstream, you paddled upstream, and it's not easy to paddle upstream, right? That's the first thing to note. But if you paddle all the way up here, all the way up here, and you go back to the source of that river, way up in the mountains, what do you find? A little trickle, a little stream. And it's much, much easier to influence and guide that little trickle to go into a different valley and go off down somewhere else and end up in a very different place coming out into the sea. And that's what we mean by going upstream. Further upstream you go, the higher your leverage, because at that little stream, you only had to put in a limited amount of force or effort to actually transform and change the whole course of that system. Whereas down here, you've got to go and invest your billions in pouring lots of concrete to try and block up this estuary, which probably isn't going to work and create a lot of problems anyway. Does that idea make sense to people? Any questions on that one so far? Good. So it's a basic concept. I mean, not rocket science, but we often overlook it, don't we? We jump into, well, we often have solutions, right? Tools, and we like to just apply them without really thinking too much about things. But that's what the iceberg model is all about, is really saying that there are 4 levels here. And, it's the analogy of the tip of the iceberg. What we normally see of an iceberg is just the top 20% or whatever's showing above the water. And actually, there's another 80% going on beneath the water that we don't see. And that's where the system structure, the patterns and the mental models are. So stuff when we walk around our city and the streets, we don't really see, the structure of the whole city, of the information flows, of the rules, of the ways that people are looking at things, or even particularly the trends over time. We just see the events, this happening and that happening and so forth. And we get caught up in those events. And systems thinking asks that we move beyond that to see these systemic structures. And when we do, we can start to think about influencing them and higher leverage points. So the iceberg model, posits 4 levels. One is the event level, the observable phenomena, actions that we see. We turn on the television or log into our media channel, and we saw yesterday there was an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, that's an event. But we don't know much about, the whole supply chain for oil and petroleum energy and so forth, and why that ship was in the Gulf and so on and so forth, what's been going on over time. Because below that is actually a pattern, a trend of maybe more oil spills around the planet, which is interesting. That's giving us deeper insight into what's going on in this system. But there's still a lot more behind that. Actually, behind that is a whole supply chain of petroleum moving around our planet. And maybe that's changing or evolving over time. We haven't really seen the structure of that, but it's obviously influencing the patterns and events and so forth. And behind all that is the mental model. So the pattern might be that we're consuming more oil and we're getting more of these oil spills. And behind that is a structure with more, containers flowing around the planet to supply all this energy for these emerging economies and so forth. But underneath all of that is a mental model that if we want to grow our economies, we need energy, and that energy is best come from petroleum-based sources. So we're going to have to increase the supply chain, ship more oil around the planet, and potentially get more oil spills. And that's a little bit the iceberg model. You can look at it across all kinds of systems. You might get a cold. Why are you getting a cold? You catch it, the trend, you catch it more often when you're tired. System structure. You're getting tired because of lack of sleep at night. Why are you getting lack of sleep? The mental model is that I have to work a lot. That's my identity. So I end up overworking, not getting enough sleep. and catching these colds and so forth. So again, that's an illustration of the iceberg model. Everybody happy with that idea? You can find, the text here. Any questions about the iceberg model? Are we all familiar with it? Of course, it plays into what we're talking about because this is where the high leverage is, right? Down at the bottom. Janina? Oh, you have to leave already. Okay, no problem. Sorry about
We will
that.
share the recording tomorrow, Janina.
Okay, great. Yeah. So essentially, systems change is all about changing these two bottom levels. The top two levels are only going to change the paths. They're going to start changing, the water down here. They're not actually going to change the whole system. So if you want to change system, you got to act on the systemic structures and the mental models. And that's where small changes can have high influences. And you may have seen this, right? If you when the paradigm changes around us and the way people are thinking and talking about something changes, that changes the whole context within which we act and other people act, and our behavior can change quite quickly. There are many examples of this. I like to think of smoking. I used to talk to my grandmother, and she said that was very cool when she was growing up. They were even taught to smoke because that was quite a fashionable thing for young ladies to do in the early mid 20th century. And now it's almost a dying sport. Like there's quite a few people you see here in where I am in central London smoking cigarettes, and it's really gone out of fashion. And that's a long journey from initially discovering that tobacco was bad for us, right? We didn't even have that awareness 100 years ago, really. And then the government starting to figure out this is costing us a lot of money in terms of our healthcare. We need to put taxes on this, and that increasing to almost a tipping point now where it's just not cool to smoke, and people really see the negative effects of it. So the paradigm is almost really changing there, and then it's no longer cool or exciting to be smoking. And when people look at it in that way, that actually changes their behavior hugely. Anybody else have a example of a changing paradigm that's really influenced, our whole set of behaviors around something? The sustainability movement to some extent, the climate change. Any other ideas? Agile movement, alcohol. Yeah, we're getting there with alcohol, aren't we? That's changing. Even night clubbing here in the UK. I heard that clubs are under a lot of stress now. They're really, it's a dying sport, and people can't afford it because of the cost of living crisis, and they have other things they want to, be on TikTok and so forth. Shopping and consumer patterns. Yeah, like shopping malls in the United States of America is almost a dying paradigm in some areas where people live and work, used to live near work. Now exemption is, yeah. Okay, that's a good one, like work from home, remote working. Yeah, so Katrina, do you know much about this smoking in the UK? Would you like to add anything there?
I
Reduction.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's quite confusing. We don't know whom you're referring to, just.
Grievous? Katrina?
It's Catherine Greaves.
Sorry, my reading.
So essentially, the reduction in smoking is sort of led by public health practice. But I've reflected here that, so all those things that you've described and where we have worked kind of across that iceberg, but we're not socialized to think of it in that way, and we don't describe it. So again, that's a piece of work I think that we need to be doing amongst our public health colleagues, to be saying, actually, this is an example of how systems approaches has been successful, and therefore we need to start thinking about applying that to our other sort of wicked public health challenges, such as the obesity. It'd be interesting to see the iceberg, going back to the obesity model that we looked at last week.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pushback too. Like there's a lot of power dynamics going on here. Also, the tobacco companies really fought back in the 80s and so forth, and the fast food and food industry is fighting back against what's coming in terms of the awareness around the implications of these food and beverages that aren't so good for us. Okay, should we stay going? You got a question here, Azra?
Yeah, so I will just start the poll. I will just start the poll. I think you can collect yourselves here, and you should be able to click on the option that you think is the correct one for the question that we have, which is how does the iceberg model help in enacting system change? And we have about 5 options. Only one option is correct, and you can choose which one it is. Maybe I'll run the timer for a minute.
You can also do the dot voting at the same time. How well are you understanding this idea of the iceberg? Just grab a dot, 1 to 10.
Oh, so if you just click on the option there, you would be able to select it. You don't have to put a dot.
Okay, should we take a look at what we've got? Azra, just stay going.
Yeah. Yeah, we have about 8 votes, and everybody picked the right answer, which is identifying high leverage points at deeper levels of abstraction.
Oh, can you click the finish maybe to show it to us? Or okay, there we go. By identifying high leverage points at deeper levels of abstraction. Yep, that's it. We often get caught up in the events, the outcomes of the system, the problems, and trying to fix those. And this is saying, actually, if you want to change the system, you got to move away from them, and we've got to paddle all the way upstream or to the bottom of the iceberg. And we've got to think about the source of most, well, it's going to this one here. Most wicked problems out there in the world are systemic, and they're not isolated problems, and they come back to how we're designing and managing the system and organizing and developing it, which comes back to how we're looking at the world, which ultimately comes back to our mental models and how we're thinking about this. And if it's a really wicked problem, you need to trace it all back upstream to our conceptual mental models and try and understand those and shift those. And maybe of theory U, which is kind of based upon the iceberg model, which is on this side is asking us to kind of download the past, understand these systemic structures and mental models, and we do need to do that first. And then down here, we can start shifting to a different mental model, a different paradigm, and out of that can emerge a new structured patterns and events and so forth. We have canvases and run workshops around that. But systems change almost always involves, changes in awareness around the system, changes in values, and an understanding of the purpose of that system. That's what's really transformative. Let me see, do we have these? Yeah, down here. So this is what Donella Meadows came up with, right? This is her paper, which is placed to intervene in a system, leverage points placed to intervene in the system, and we've got our system down here. Unfortunately, this graphic makes it look a little bit linear, but anyway, if you go further up here, the idea of a leverage point, Mr. Archimedes a few thousand years ago, give me a lever long enough and I can lift the whole world. And, the further we go out here, the higher our leverage. So down here, the immediate kind of quantitative parameters in the system, the events, the things we see, the material flows. And back up here are kind of the underlying system dynamics and the flows of information, the rules. These are the systemic structures. So these here are talking about system structures, and these three are talking about paradigms, mental models, the goals of the system, and transcending paradigms, which is getting to values and so forth. So that's how she laid it out in this very specific way. And but it is relating to the iceberg there. So everybody happy with that? Any questions before we move on to a little activity? I will say this is not the only approach to leverage points, right? So we got a bit stuck on this idea of that, you should always go up here to change the system when it's not really that simple, because it obviously leads us to that conclusion, doesn't it? It's like, okay, well, to change the system, we've got to change the mental models, and that's what it's all about. There's a bit more to all of this. We've got to think about the structure and interrelationships and the network and stakeholders and so forth. So this is just one way of looking at it. We're going to kind of build upon that as we go forwards. But Azra, do you want to take us to our exercise?
Yeah. So we now have a little exercise here where we collect and reflect on working on the iceberg model. We are still using the same challenge statement as we did in our last workshop, trying to build a systems map and understanding which actors and factors are involved. So the challenge statement here for today is poverty in a rural town in Brazil. This is a general statement, and I think this is also quite interesting for all of us to work out. We will do this exercise for about 7 minutes. You can grab a sticky there and maybe just make sure that your sticky is small so you can so everybody can be able to put that in there. And then just put your thoughts around events, patterns, structures, and models. And then towards the end, we will discuss the flow of the whole iceberg model, and then we'll go back to learning about the leverage points. So I'll start the timer for all of us now.
Yep. Try to keep your stickies small so they fit in the space here. Yeah, so it's a great opportunity for you to think about, these things on different levels. What do they look like on those different levels? For those who haven't joined, do encourage you to walk through this exercise, whether on the mirror board, I'll share that link now, or, wherever you are if you can't make it to the mirror board. If you have any questions about the activity or anything else, feel free to drop those in the chat. So for structure, it's really about how the system is organized, how things are connected in that system, whether it's information, who talks to who, and what are the channels of communication between different actors. Could be the way that resources flow, money, and so forth. It could be the way that the natural or physical environment, the way that a city is structured and so forth. Do all the roads lead into a central roundabout, or are they decentralized and so forth? Mental models are essentially the way that people are looking at that system. And yeah, the categories and the words, you can often see it in the words they use and talk about to describe the system, would be the mental models. The assumptions is also, I mean, mental models and paradigms are, yeah, pretty similar words. When we say paradigm, I often say the set of assumptions, because they normally go unquestioned and undiscussed, not discussed, because they're just built into the assumptions of the actors in the system. If you put a group of people together for long enough, they will start to build implicit shared meaning and understanding of the system that generally goes unquestioned, and they just act within that paradigm, that set of assumptions. And that is are the mental models. So Sylvia, does transcending paradigms mean having the ability to form new mental models that might not be as per the status quo? Yes, it's being aware of the concepts and the conceptual framework and the ideas and language that you're using to talk about the system, so that you can then question that and say, does this make sense or not? A classic one is in modern science. We had the Newtonian paradigm, which really formed the basis of modern science for 300-400 years. And people took it as a given, an assumption, Newtonian physics, until Einstein's general theory of relativity and so forth came along. And it essentially questioned all the underlying assumptions about time and space being absolute by saying it's relative. So suddenly people woke up and said, oh my God, maybe space isn't absolute. Maybe it changes depending on the speed you're traveling and so forth. And then suddenly the group of people say, okay, the assumptions we're using, we never, really question those, but maybe they aren't the full story. And you'll see that in all groups of people who come to form a shared knowledge base, shared understanding of the world. A culture is a good example. Cultures, like national cultures. Azra.
There's another question.
Is a group's mental model different from individual mental models, though, or can it be? Certainly can be. I mean, not all, French people are exactly the same, right? They have a shared culture, but individually they can be different. The people in your organization can be different and so forth. Yeah.
Thanks, Josh. So we are done with the 7-minute timer, and I really like what Louis did here with all the arrows, and I would invite him to maybe share his thoughts before we move on to the presentation. Okay, I'll give it a minute for Louis, and then we will just look at the other. Or is it Louis? I'm sorry, Louis Malato. Okay.
There's one here, Denise. I found it hard to make groups aware of their mental models. Do you agree? Self-reflection is not something we all master. Certainly true. Yes. Yes. Most people don't want to unpack their mental models. And it can be difficult to kind of lead them in that direction. So, and normally it's like we're like fish in water with our mental models. They help us operate effectively every day and not have to question everything. And thus we like to just use them and get on with things. And we don't want to go about kind of examining them. Often they involve biases, they involve, stereotypes and stigmas and all sorts of things we don't want to look at. And it requires to kind of deconstruct our whole framework that's kind of helping us operate. And when we do that, we're not as effective. We have to reconstruct that again to go and kind of operate in the world. So it can be hugely challenging for a lot of people. Yeah.
So I was just grouping it as you were explaining this, Joss, and I found a lot around crime and performance and healthcare and how it leads to how that is being led from the poverty. And if any of you would like to unmute and maybe explain the stickies that you've put here, that would be amazing. And we can move to the presentation in a short while. So Luis, sorry, I'm just reading your question here. I just wanted to ask you if it's okay for you to walk us through the stickies that you put here, and then so we like get your perspective.
Okay, thank you, Ashpa. Okay, the idea was to detect some symptoms that we can observe, like increase of crime in rural towns, and after that, try to understand in the mapping diagram that what is the pattern behind the increase of crime, for example. And I try to understand where I can find a cycle. And I found one in exploitation, inadequate livelihood, lack of income, that increase poverty, and after that, increase urban migration that created unsafe environments, create exploitation, and increase crime. So that's for me, that is a pattern that is increase the crime, and after that.
Yeah, I mean, think about in South Africa, you know, they got this legacy of apartheid, and the apartheid system actually informed a lot of city planning and created whole zones which pushed the indigenous people out to the suburb areas. And now that still persists, that structure, and they have to commute for an hour or 2 hours to get to the places where the good jobs are in the city, right? So all your time's gone like that. And a lot of people, you know, from Manila to Mexico City, the poor people live out in the suburbs with poor, they have to spend, you know, 90 minutes commuting each way. And imagine that's kind of keeping you in a cycle of poverty, isn't it? If you haven't got time then to go and look for another job or do many other things or get education if you're spending, you know, 2 hours, 3 hours commuting every day. So that's an underlying systemic structure, you know.
Yeah. So do you want to go back to the presentation, Joss?
Yeah, I will do. Any other comments or questions on all of this? Is it making sense? We're going to move on now. We have the iceberg. We have this canvas. You'll find the canvas on the website if you want to use this. Yep. Okay, so here we are. Let's move on then. This idea of social acupuncture, which is looking at it slightly different. So that idea we're exploring there was really all about abstraction, that we need to move away from the event level and go down to, you know, structures and mental models, and that's going to get us to things more systemic and get us upstream, where we can have higher leverage. But there's another way of looking at systems, which is as a network, as a network of interrelated factors, as we did last time with our systems maps. So we want to look at this also. And all systems, whether they're simple or complex, they look like this in terms of their internal structure, set of elements, and they're interrelated in some way. We talked about a family before. We talked about, you know, a business or a supply chain or whatever it is. And then we can start looking at that. And we know the elements in that system are going to be influenced by where they are in that network and what they're connected to and what they're not connected to, right? I mean, going back to what I was just saying about, we take Johannesburg in South Africa, and imagine you live way out in some suburb here, which is not connected at all. Connected to transport could be not connected to good food either. You know, one of these food deserts. Whereas another person lives here in the center of Johannesburg, all the good jobs are around them. There's, you know, healthy food and so forth. So where you find yourself in that system and the flow, how things flow through this structure is determined a lot by the structure of that system. and who gets what and where are the good places to be and what are the outcomes and so forth is determined a lot by this this structure here. So we want to think about that because that's another way of getting high leverage, right? Finding the right places to intervene within this network. And this idea of social acupuncture is a bit like the original idea of acupuncture, you know, that a body is a system and there's flows of energy in that. And when there are problems, it's normally due to, you know, blockages. And can we actually find places in that network like they do to do their acupuncture, put their pins in to redirect the flow of resources and energy and so forth to influence that overall system. So again, it's trying to move away from our traditional kind of siloed approach of looking at as a system, an organization or whatever it is, a city, to a networked approach and ask how things are connected and flow. Influence leverage points within this, there can be very high leverage points, right? If we influence here, maybe in a central node, if this is a city, and well, here in London, I'm in East London, there's not very many bridges here in East London. The last one is Tower Bridge, and it's quite a small one, and a lot of traffic goes through it. So that's a bit of a leverage point. If we could change that, we might be able to influence a lot of the traffic that's happening in East London. So that's the idea of kind of influencing flows within the system to try and influence the overall system. It's down here, reconfiguring flows. So this is Aura Gal, who I know this lady, she introduced the idea, the manner in which money, information, behavior, skills, ideas flow through a certain network will ultimately determine overall well-being. When we recognize really successful ecologies, that could be a peaceful community, a successful education system, or just a great city vibe. What we actually recognize is a certain pattern. It's a just right Goldilocks mix of structures and flows. And while these channels can't be engineered, they can be actively promoted. And her idea of acupuncture is, okay, if we understand this network, then we can go and influence it, find places to potentially try and support the development of certain things in that network and try to disconnect and disrupt other elements in that system. So it's another way of looking at the leverage points idea, and we need to bring all of these into play when we go about doing this work. And here's maybe a better graphic to explain that to you. This is the rich get richer that systems dynamic. We may have looked at it last time, right? It's a systems dynamic model where money's coming in and we're thinking about who to give it to. And it keeps on going to the rich person over here, because of this underlying pattern, the underlying systemic dynamic. And so you have this problem then of inequality, right? This person over here is not getting any resources, so they're getting under-resourced and not doing very well. This one's getting over-resourced. And you might think, well, then we're just got to tax this person over here, or this country, or this corporation, or whatever it is, and that might help the situation. But if you tax that person over there, you're still going to have money pouring in here and going over there. The system hasn't actually changed. So you've just taken an approach that's trying to fix the symptoms at the top of the iceberg. But if you actually saw it as a system, right? That approach, you don't understand it as a system. All you see is the outcomes. These people are getting richer and those people have no money. So we need to take some money from those people and give it to those people. That's a very piecemeal or non-systemic way of looking at it, right? If we then see the underlying systems dynamics, well, that changes our perspective. We say, okay, there's a dynamic going on here. So whenever we throw money into this thing, it's going to keep on going back to these people. So can we actually change that dynamic? And that's inevitably going to mean something about these linkages, right? The reason it's going back here is because of this dynamic going on here. So can we change that linkage there and influence this linkage here so that actually it makes more sense for money to start flowing naturally towards these people over here instead of these ones over here? And that's what we're talking about when we say this kind of networked approach instead of looking at the parts, working with the systemic structures. When we do this taxation thing, we're going to constantly push against the underlying system dynamics. So let's try and understand those, and let's try and influence and change those systems dynamics so that the money starts to naturally flow in this direction. We try to do something about this linkage here, whatever it is, and change that one so it starts flowing in this direction. And we get a healthier system over time. That's looking at the kind of system dynamics. This is the network analysis again. We can see there's a gentleman or lady who's quite important in this system. And if we don't look at it in this way, then we might not know who that person is if we don't look at it as a network. I always think of the example of where I work at WeWork at Tower Bridge again. There's a few hundred people in the WeWork, a number of different companies, and generally people don't know each other that well. But there's one gentleman at the center here who knows almost everyone, most of the people in that building. And that's very different from everyone else. And that gentleman is the barista, because everyone drinks coffee and they go to the barista and they get their coffee in the morning, they line up and they all chat with him. And he's a very friendly Turkish gentleman, and they all know him and they all like him. Actually, he's a very likable person. So if you wanted to influence that system, you went into the WeWork office, you might try and go to the boss or something to get change in that system. But you probably want to talk to this humble gentleman who you may not notice at all initially, because he's the one who's going to spread information easily across that network. There are other examples of studies done on companies in Hungary where they study the network and they find the CEO and upper management are actually not near the center at all. They're further out here. At the center was the medic, the person traveling from the company to company, talking to all the employees around the country because they had different offices and sharing information, bringing information, and they're all friendly with him because he was giving them free, medical advice and so forth. So this is what they mean by counterintuitive. We would have thought it's the CEO, the director I need to talk to if I want to do something in this company. But if we wanted to, whatever it is, change their health practices or something, we might want to talk to this medic. So that's a different way of looking at the world, this networked way, and it gives us new places to intervene, potentially high leverage, right? This person, the bit center here, is a high leverage point. Okay, how do you feel about that idea, people? Any questions or comments? Do you have any questions, Azra, or this one here? Should we try it?
Yeah, I will just start the poll for everybody and maybe also bring everyone to me. So the question is, what is the primary goal of leverage assessment? And I will run the timer for about a minute so we can gather our thoughts. It's quite simple. Whichever option that you think is the correct one or is appropriate, you can just click on that option, and that means you've selected that, and you don't have to pull any stickies around the option.
Any questions in the chat or any
Yeah, there is one from Sylvia who is asking, can we say that the leverage points exist within a spectrum where we have high leverage points and low leverage points?
Yeah, we're going to look at that now in a minute. Actually, yep. But I think you can see there's two different things going on here. The kind of abstraction thing, which obviously lays out, we saw quite clearly different levels and idea, as Donella Meadows said, right? So if you talk about a spectrum, she kind of lays that out here. There's obviously high leverage up here. But we also have to think about the network and think about, we can obviously see this is high leverage person here and this not so important, depending how we look at it. So yes, we can look more at that, Ezra.
So all of us chose the very right answer for this question, which is to evaluate the degree of leverage and capacity at intervention points.
Great. And how are you feeling about this idea at this stage? It's getting a little bit more complex as we talk about networks and so forth. The iceberg's pretty pretty straightforward. You do have to figure out the difference, like what is a mental model and what is a structure and so forth. But it's generally quite straightforward. This network analysis is a little bit more tricky, but hopefully you see the relevance. We'll talk a bit more about this. We'll take another 10 minutes or so before we go to our workshop. Anyone else want to vote there? Mark?
Yeah, there's a question from Mark, which says that maybe leverage points, they change over time with situations.
Yeah, certainly. Everything's dynamic in complex systems. Okay, let's stay going. So here we have it, a system and its dynamics, right? And we can see these are some of the things to think about. We have flows through that system, whether it's money, whether it's goods, whether it's migration, whether it's information or whatever. And there will be accumulations in certain places, scarcity in others, stocks. There'll be regulators of that flow and so forth. And these are things we can consider as we go to intervene. And ultimately, when we come to make these interventions and we think about a network, we need to think about how things are working together. So a leverage point, we'll talk about it now. We'll be developing a bit of strategy and assessing different leverage points, but we'll never have one leverage point in a system, right? A system will look like this, we'll map it out, and there should always be a number of different intervention points. Because you need to intervene across different dimensions of the system for it to really change. One focus won't do that. But you need to think about how those are working together. They should be working synergistically. Otherwise you're kind of reducing your leverage. If you can get something here, something in finance and something in education, they can work synergistically, and that can really amplify your interventions. And of course, they should be dispersed enough to actually be acting on the different parts of the system you need to be acting on in a coordinated way to actually change that system. And then, of course, at different levels of abstraction, so that you are thinking about changing mental models and structures and so forth. So the most non-systemic approach would be, there's a big problem in this system, and we need to just focus all our energy on that problem, right? That's maybe going to fix the problem for a while. It's not going to change the system. A systemic approach is understanding the system, stepping back, saying there's multiple factors here, multiple dimensions. We need to intervene across these different dimensions. This is the best place to intervene in education, best place to intervene in finance, in management, or whatever it is. And this is how we're going to put those together so they add up to more than the sum of their parts. And this is how they're really acting on different levels in terms of the mental models and the system structure, so that we're getting that high leverage. Does that make sense to people? You see, it gets a little bit more complex when we talk about kind of the full scope of things here. And of course, we need to do an assessment about our abilities. Are we able to get high, influence there? Are we able to get it there? Where are we able to get our influence? Because that will matter at the end of the day. So we're going to get to that in a second. But hopefully you're seeing the bigger picture. Often when people talk about leverage points, they just talk about the iceberg model. And people then think, oh, we just got to change mental models and everything will be fine. This is a more complex reality where you have a complex system. You map it out, you think across different dimensions, you think about how high those intervention points are they working synergistically together in a coordinated way? Are they sufficiently distributed across the system to actually change the system? And are you working on different levels of abstraction also? Okay, any questions or comments about this so far? Good. And how can we change, what are currently negative synergies within the system to positive ones, right? These two things are working badly together. Can we flip that to a positive synergy? And that's the sort of stuff we need to be thinking about. I'm going to stay going for the sake of time. We finally want to think about, okay, we've done our systems map, we've identified those leverage points, we've thought about synergies and abstraction and all of this. We've come up with a good hypothesis about what we want to go ahead and do, but we do want to think about our capacity as individuals and organizations, because that matters who we are and our ability to intervene these things. In these areas, some areas we have greater ability. If we're a government, we can make policy, and that gives us high leverage there. If we're a financial institution, we might have money to direct in different places, or investment. That gives us certain leverage. Non-for-profit, a grassroots movement, whatever it is. So we need to consider who we are. And that gets to kind of an assessment of not just how, you know, the leverage, how high the leverage is, and looking at the network structures we talked about and the synergies, but also our capacity. Like, we have low capacity in these areas, but in these areas, we have high capacity to actually make something happen. We have these connections, so we can go and talk to these people. We don't have those connections. It's going to be difficult to go and talk to those people and make something happen there. So that can give us a little schema, a little framework like this, where we're thinking about, you know, down here is low leverage, low capacity, so we don't want to do too many things there. So this is, yeah, once we've come up with our strategy about where we're going to intervene, we can use this just to assess those and think, well, is this low capacity and low leverage? We won't do that. Is this high leverage, low capacity? Low leverage, high capacity? And also we want to be in this high leverage, high capacity area, so that we can really make things happen and work with those intervention points. Okay, so let's just jump quickly into our question, Asha, and a little voting. You're on mute.
Sorry, I just realized that. Thanks, Josh. So this is a question here for this section, which is, what does capacity refer to in leverage assessment? And we have 5 options that you can choose from. I will run a timer for about a minute.
Okay. I think we have an answer already.
But I will press submit after the 30 seconds.
I think they're cheating, Asha. That's the problem. Come on. Alrighty, any questions so far? Is everybody happy with the ideas that we've covered? You're starting to get the idea. We're going to be putting this into practice now, so hopefully you have.
Okay. I will have a clear winner, and that's the amount of resources available at a point for intervention.
A clear winner, all right. Okay, so should we stay moving then, Asha?
Yeah. I think there is a question in the meanwhile in the chat that you can answer, Joss.
So to build on Sylvia's question, are paradigms and mental models exactly the same? If so, is one term used more than the other? I think I've seen Meadows make use of paradigm more. Yeah, so paradigm is a really interesting word. Paradigm in its abstract sense refers to a pattern of some kind. Within mental models, it's referring to a pattern of thought or a whole conceptual framework. So I would say mental models and paradigms are slightly different. Mental model can be a specific mental model around a thing, I would say. A paradigm is really a worldview. It's a way of looking at something. It's a culture. It's an all-encompassing framework within which you go and interpret things, and you may have specific mental models. So I would use them slightly differently. Other people might have other perspectives on that. I generally use the word paradigm to refer to this, or another one is worldview. So a paradigm is a worldview, and those are good words to use because they're talking about the overall framework within which you interpret things. Mental models may be a bit more narrowly defined, specific things within that worldview. But yeah, I mean, love to hear other people's perspective on that, but we may stay going.
Okay,
Just about the concept of identifying leverage points in a network. Does it equate to the leverage points on information flows? Well, it can be information flows. So anything could be flowing on that network. It could be information. It could be money. It could be trust or relationships between people within a community. You know, it could be many things flowing. So information would be one of them, and information is very important. Yes. Yep.
okay. Thanks, Joss. So now we find ourselves here at this section of the workshop. On the screen, I did bring everybody to me, so you should be on the right part of the mirror board. On the screen now, you see a map for poverty. There are different directions of the arrow. The ones that are leading into the poverty are the ones that are inputs for the poverty. And the ones that are leading outside are the consequences because of the situation of poverty. So the activity is quite simple. We'll take some time, maybe about 10 to 15 minutes to see in which of these factors can there be a scope of intervention. We'll just pull a sticky and say, oh, this is where I would like to bring intervention or intervene within the system. And you can take some time to go through the map and then to see where you would like to intervene within the system. And then we collect our thoughts after the given time, and then we come back and discuss.
Great. Yeah. So take a bit of time to look over the map and have a think about it. And also then, yeah, think about your potential interventions. Afterwards, we'll think about assessing them, which ones we might use and might prefer. Should I put 10 minutes on the clock, Ursula?
Okay, is 10 minutes good, Josh?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Oh. Some funky music too. Alrighty. So we'll leave you to consider. As you put them up, you can also think about what level of the iceberg they might be on, to get you considering that. Do you think this would be a structural intervention or a change in mental model, or potentially just an event, trying to change events or trends over time? You can also think about different, connections and synergies between different intervention points. How you might have a coordinated strategy here. Are there things in, land migration? Someone's drawn a connection there, farm failures or lack of capital that could be interrelated in terms of your interventions, or corruption. We're ultimately trying to develop a whole strategy here, aren't we? In terms of across this, what would be the interventions to disrupt these different current states and change them to new ones? Have any questions about this? You can put them in chat, or anything else we've covered so far. I guess many of the ones, closest to problem, should we say, are kind of the immediate things, aren't they? The immediate causes of it. So when we're going further away, we're probably getting to more systemic things like, crime up here, or austerity policies, diverted funds, or corruption, more kind of secondary and tertiary and systemic in some respects. I guess particularly we talked about this last time. We got this cycle going on, and is there a way to kind of break that cycle? Would be one important question. See a dynamic, we talked about it before, in a system, a certain pattern that's reoccurring. It's often because of these underlying system dynamics here. Is the way of breaking that.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. I see a lot of thoughts around different points of intervention within the system. Would any of you like to go ahead and maybe explain the different points that you put up here on the map before we move on looking at the stickies? Ken, would you like to do something like that? Sorry, I could just see you on the screen. I called you.
Sorry, I was lost in thought there. What did you ask me again?
Sorry, just in case if you put up some stickies on the map here, would you like to just help us understand why you put them there and your insight into why it might be helpful?
I actually didn't put any up. Excuse me, because I was trying to focus on the whole flow of the system. Okay, and then from the getting the flow of the system where the key nodes are, and then what would potentially be the level of intervention that one could take that would be an immediate or easier one, but not necessarily a longer term one, or one that would turn the system away from its cycles right now. So what it got me to the farm failure and lack of skills. I didn't put anything up. But those two together, if you go back towards where they are, lack of opportunity, lack of capital, lack of education, and they're directly related to or consequences of poverty, I would say. And you look at the aid programs on the other side, there's corruption in there and whatnot. So what I saw there was an opportunity to initiate some microfinancing that might enhance the opportunity to turn farm failure into farm sustainability, and also lack of education leading to lack of skills. Looking at an intervention there, which is oriented towards agroeconomy, agronomics, that could also correlate with the micro financing of entrepreneurial activities. But then when I saw that, I thought, okay, where's the potential shift? We don't have one on this particular systems map. So that would have to take it the loops elsewhere, I suppose, and start a positive spiral in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You got to understand the map, and there's a lot of different opportunities here, isn't there? Time
Yeah.
to through this, right? We gave you 10 minutes, obviously.
To resolve, I usually need 2 beers to resolve poverty.
Yeah. But
Okay.
some interesting stuff. If we think about, you were speaking to it there, like what's the immediate things we could do, right? So like if we were the, government coming in, then for the next 4 years, they're obviously going to try and pick some low-hanging fruits to get some wins and so forth. So this universal income may be the most immediate, but we're going to recognize that's not going to, change the system, is it? So then we can start going outwards. We can start really questioning, well, what's going on underneath here? Obviously, corruption is probably a big part of this, education and so forth. So it's interesting to look at that kind of different levels, again, of the
Indeed.
iceberg. Yeah.
And the other thing that we don't have on this type of a map is the level, shall we call it the level of urgency? Okay, so that we can identify what's really a hot spot or what's really a breakdown, bottleneck, or disconnect, and how severely that's impacting the whole system. And so we're left on our own to sort of decide that.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
and I suppose with respect to neural networking, I suppose you would change perhaps the thickness of the lines, for example, with the arrows. As an example, you could change the heat mapping. You could put heat mapping onto it. For example, things such as that, but that takes more sophistication with respect to. It's going beyond to where we are right now, and that's the other thing I struggled with, was saying, okay, where are the most significant things where intervention would be desired, okay, as opposed to the whole map at an equal level, like equal playing level in terms of urgency and importance.
So maybe those are great points about the kind of practicalities of what's possible and what's really going to work in the short run, at least, and so forth. Maybe we jump into, our assessment, Ezra, shall we? Because we should actually have some of what you say as part of that, Ken. Maybe it's not there fully, but we'll think about it in the future. Ezra, do you want to jump in there? Or?
I can take another stickies before we move on to the next part of the section. I really liked what Adil did here with the stickies, and he said which is a structure, which is a mental model, and how does it intervene in the system. And I would like to invite him if it's okay for him to explain that a bit in detail. Well, that's okay then. So before we move on to understanding where leverage point, the intervention points can be of great capacity and how can it actually build upon the system, I think it would be also interesting for us to take some time out to understand who are the different actors that would be necessary to come together for this intervention points that are put on the map here. Maybe we can do that for about 2 to 3 minutes because it will really highlight what capacities do they bring within the system and how will that help with the system's change. Would you like to add something, Joss, there?
I might just skip over that, Asha. I mean, we just get to the last part because I don't think we really have time, do we?
Well, okay. So here, the section down below, we have about 4 different types of stickies, which are in 4 different colors. So each represent one quadrant, which is what Joss just explained to us in the presentation towards the end, talking about how the capacity varies within different parts of the quadrant and how it really also depends within the resources and the actors involved. So for the stickies that are put here, maybe each one of you can pick 4 stickies. 4 dots there, the 4 color dots, and say which one is high leverage, low capacity, high leverage, high capacity, and all the 4 quadrants. So you can choose 4 dots per each, and then you can also just vote on the stickies there. Would you like to do this for about 5 minutes or 3 minutes, just?
Yeah, we could take 4 minutes.
Okay, that's a median. Okay.
Medium. Yeah. I'll just start the clock there, but I'll say that yeah, the actor mapping is important, right? We didn't quite get to that today. Obviously, once you built your map, you'd start thinking about the different actors. So please jump into the exercise there. But I just want to say a few words about the actor mapping. Once you build your map, you'd start doing your stakeholder analysis and looking into that to understand these actors, these different elements in the system, and work through that so you have a better understanding of them before kind of going into the real intervention points and this assessment what we're doing here. We didn't get time to do that. We do have a guide on the site. But yeah, we'll take 3 minutes now, put up one of these dots for each quadrant, where we think it is. Yep.
Does we have a question in the chat? Fine. If you would like to also ask it.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean, it
sorry.
goes.
Sorry,
We should have shared, who we are as the actor in this system, because that's obviously part of it, right? If we said we're, a grassroots non-for-profit organization trying to address poverty locally, if we're that actor, we should have given you that information. But if we take that role, then it brings into focus our strengths and our weaknesses, our abilities, who we can talk to, who we can't. And if we take that, then we can make a better assessment of this kind. Yep. So Danielle, do you want to speak that one out, or?
Oh, I was just saying, excuse me, my voice is a bit hoarse, but before you started talking about the actors, and just because I jumped in, I was not able to fully participate, just listen, but just looking at the map there, I felt like the first leverage point is actually looking at how do we get the people who are the champions of these various things together? Because if all of these things are impacting poverty or influences poverty, then they have to be addressed simultaneously. And so you're going to need the right people to be a part of doing that. And so once you get those people together, then you look at leverage points once more of where the leverage points are within education and farming and so on and so forth, and see how you can use what they have and
Yep.
collectively to address those things.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to what's coming in the future about ecosystem building and how we build upon what exists, systems gardening, building upon looking at these different areas, thinking about, oh, generally we need to intervene there, but then following on from that, in future sections, we'll talk about how we're going to intervene there. Is it something we need to design and develop ourselves, or are there already champions there, as you say, that we need to work with and build upon and connect and resource and all of that? So definitely coming in the future, after we've identified generally the areas where we want to work on or need to.
So would you then put in an actor map
Yeah,
as the next
so
step?
it would come before the leverage points. Normally you do the systems mapping and then the actor mapping there. We have kind of skipped over it in our sessions. Like after the actor mapping one last week, we have another guide on, after the systems map, we have another guide on actor mapping. So we would have done it there before we jumped into this. Yep. Ezra?
Yeah, sorry. So I thought maybe you would like to summarize this bit there.
You go for it.
Okay. Um, so we will go with the ones on the darker orange or red color stickies, which are high leverage, high capacity, which are around shifting programs around mindset, and then also increasing touristic safe routes on rural towns, severe laws to avoid exploitation, and maybe increasing education in for youngsters in rural town about the tourism visits on rural life. Thinking about redesigning the services with a focus on accessibility for different services like transportation information, focus investment in public service development and on clean water, sanitation, and mental
It's going to
model.
be a long-term one, though, isn't it? These systemic ones are going to take a bit more time, aren't they? But yeah.
Some are also about maybe bringing those immediate effect in changes that will really have a long-term consequence, which is positive and really help with the situation that we have there. And I think,
Eight programs. There was two there, wasn't there?
yeah,
So it's-
increase the support NGOs. I think it really also speaks about co-creating with the people who are affected. So there is less dependence and more about empowerment. So it actually just builds that kind of skill to overcome the poverty in these areas.
Great. So maybe we'll start to draw to a close. Any questions about this one, or comments, or how are you feeling about this so far? We're doing good. We're starting to get the idea here. Very intriguing from Ken. Everyone else, we've just touched upon this. Last week we touched upon systems mapping, and we would have looked at actor mapping. Danielle?
I can wait until you close out. I had a question that was a little bit off topic.
Okay, sure. We'll do that then. So just to draw to a close then, we're talking about leverage points, places to intervene in a system to try and realize high leverage and be strategic in our interventions. Ultimately, this is about strategy as we go from trying to frame and think systemically about the system, understand it and map it out is what we've been doing in the past. Now we're transitioning towards going about intervening and trying to change this. And this is the place where we're thinking strategically about those intervention points. And we started off by talking about, the classical idea, which was all about levels of abstraction, Donella Meadows, and the iceberg model, and trying to find, high leverage down towards the bottom by influencing systemic structures and mental models and paradigms and so forth, as we talked about. And from there, we progressed onto this more contemporary idea, which is a more networked kind of view of it. Of course, it's not either or. We want both, as we've seen. But this is really looking at the system as a network of flows, of interrelationships and connections, and recognizing that we can have high leverage if we understand that network and we intervene in the right place, and also right places, I should say, and they should be coordinated kind of synergistically. So it's understanding that flow of resources so that we can find these kind of key places at the right level of abstraction and intervene across a number of aspects that are working synergistically to influence the system structure and dynamics, and then doing this assessment based upon our capacities and our understanding of leverage in the system. So that's what we talked about, and then we did our little exercise here, and hopefully this brought this together for you. Of course, you know, it's 10 minutes when in reality we would have spent quite a bit of time researching this situation, you know, being there and building these maps and understanding the map before we even jump into these intervention points, and then obviously taking time to do this and negotiating and discussing and being a particular actor in the system and knowing the other actors in the system also, and what's kind of possible, and as we talked about, what's potentially low-hanging fruit and what's more substantial long-term interventions that's going to take time, but they are more systemic in the end. So I think that's also part of it. Hopefully that's a good little summary, a good little insight into what we're talking about when we say leverage points, places to intervene in a complex system, and we'll draw to a close.
Yeah, and then I would like to maybe bring you all to the next session that's happening on Wednesday next week. That would be the week 6, leaving us about a few more towards the end of the Systems Innovative Learner series. For the next session, maybe it's also important and also interesting for you to go through these guides and the syllabus for that. You can also find that on the Systems Innovation platform. Here are the 4 or 5 guides that we have, and this is all the collection of the 21 guides divided to these 4 dimensions, and this is how we also build the narrative for systems innovation at the network. We really would be interested to get your feedback so we can develop this and make it a very good experience for learning for all of you. So it's quite simple. Just pull up a dot wherever you think it fits, and then I also pulled up a few comments from the chat to just put there. If you have anything that you would like to highlight, you can also use one of these stickies there. And here is a list of resources that we have listed that might be helpful for you to understand this better. And just wanted to also highlight that we have a course on leverage points that might be also interesting for you to go through after the session or whenever you would like to come back to learn more about the leverage points. And hope to see you in the next session happening next Wednesday.
Right.
Thanks everyone
Take
for
care, guys.
joining.
Talk soon.